English translation 625th contact. Part 2. Saturday, the 15th of August 2015, 1744 hours.
Then there is also the article by Bernadette regarding vitamin K, which Anjana and Florina also took and forwarded. We have already talked about this in the month of May, wherein you said that you will not go into such issues in the future. However, in relation to the said article, you still want to say whether what was said is of correctness or not.
Of course, I have also read this article and can say that what is described with regard to the vitamin is correct.
Do you know about vitamin K? Vitamin K, what is it?
The fat-soluble vitamins A, D, and E also include the vitamin K complex vitamins K1, K2, K3, and K4. Their absorption through food is increased by the simultaneous intake of healthy fats and oils, in some cases even made possible in the first place. The K vitamins are stable against oxygen and very heat-resistant. They are hardly degraded by cooking or frying. However, when exposed to light, vitamin K becomes inactive and quickly loses its bioavailability. Vitamin K occurs in two natural forms as vitamin K1 phylloquinone and vitamin K2 menaquinone, which is also produced by certain bacteria in the intestines of human beings. According to recent studies, it is synthesized naturally by human beings from vitamin K1 phylloquinone. Vitamin K1 is mainly found in the leaves of various green plants, which should be included in the daily diet to ensure a sufficient supply of vitamin K1 or to increase the vitamin K levels in the blood. Good sources of vitamin K1 are, for example, kale, purslane, spinach or leafy salads, as well as drinks made from various grass powders such as wheatgrass, kamut grass, barley grass, spelt grass, or a combination of different grasses and herbs, but these should come from high-quality sources. Other potent suppliers of vitamin K1 are, for example, beetroot leaves beetroot, which contain more minerals and nutrients than the tubers, which are considered particularly healthy. The various types of cabbage, such as Brussels sprouts, broccoli, or white cabbage, are also highly recommended for covering vitamin K1 requirements, while sauerkraut is a good supplier of vitamin K2 due to its content of microorganisms. Herbs such as chives and parsley as well as avocado are rich in vitamin K, whereby avocado also provides the valuable fats necessary for absorption. However, avocado consumption also promotes the absorption of many other fat-soluble substances such as vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, alpha and beta-carotene, lutein, lycopene, zeaxanthin, and calcium. Vitamin K2 is produced by microorganisms, among others also by bacteria of the intestinal flora, and can be absorbed directly via the intestinal cells. A healthy intestine, as an important organ of the immune system, is the basis for the supply of nutrients and trace elements. Sources of vitamin K2 include raw sauerkraut, butter, egg yolk, liver, and some types of cheese. Functions of vitamin K in the body. Vitamin K primarily regulates the blood's ability to clot. However, high doses of vitamin K do not lead to increased blood clotting or to a risk of thrombosis because the body uses the vitamin K optimally and thus ensures a balance in blood clotting. A vitamin K deficiency, on the other hand, inhibits the blood's ability to clot, which can lead to increased bleeding. Vitamin K is also important for the prevention and regression of arteriosclerosis or hardening of the arteries. As a result of poor and unhealthy nutrition, blood pressure rises and causes microscopic cracks in the inner walls of the arteries, which the body tries to repair. If the necessary vital substances such as vitamin C and vitamin E are missing, it resorts to LDL cholesterol, which attracts calcium and other substances from the blood, which then plug the cracks. These calcium deposits are called plaque and can cause heart attacks and strokes when they break away from the inner walls of the arteries. Calcium is an important mineral that plays an important role in numerous processes, not only in the formation of bones and teeth. If the body cannot remove calcium from the blood due to disease or malnutrition, it is absorbed by the walls of the blood vessels, which can lead not only to dangerous hardening of the arteries, but probably also to kidney stones. Vitamin K has been shown to remove excess calcium from the blood and ensure that it is not deposited in the blood vessels or kidneys, but is channeled into the bones and teeth. It thus reduces the risk of arteriosclerosis, as well as presumably also kidney stones. Studies over a period of 10 years have shown that a diet rich in vitamin K2 significantly reduces the formation of plaque and that the risk of associated diseases such as heart attacks and strokes is reduced by 50%. However, it is not only vitamin K that plays a special role in the function of blood vessel protection, but also vitamin D in sufficiently high doses, which is equally indispensable for producing the matrix GLA protein that provides the actual protection against calcification. Studies conducted in the USA on rats have shown that vitamin K2 is even capable of reversing existing arteriosclerosis. Certain blood-thinning drugs can have the side effect of preventing vitamin K from regulating calcium levels in the blood, which can lead to arteriosclerosis. Higher doses of vitamin K have been shown to reduce pre-existing arteriosclerosis in animals by 50%. In addition to calcium and vitamin D, healthy and strong bones also need vitamin K, which carries the required calcium from the blood and into the bones and teeth. In addition, vitamin K activates the protein osteocalcin, which is involved in bone formation and can only bind the calcium and incorporate it into the bones through the action of vitamin K. Studies from 2005 have shown that a vitamin K2 deficiency in older women leads to lower bone density and an increased risk of bone fractures. Other studies, on the other hand, were able to prove that bone loss in people who already had osteoporosis could be suppressed by administering large amounts of vitamin K2, and that bone formation could even be stimulated again. The importance of a sufficient supply of vitamins K1 and K2 is proven by studies in which high vitamin D levels could be detected. But there was an undersupply of the K vitamins. In these cases, the risk of osteoporosis was even increased. Vitamin K2 also seems to play an important role in leukemia. Research with cancer cells in the test tube suggests that vitamin K2 can trigger the self-destruction of leukemia cells. In a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, it was shown that only 10% of the test subjects who had an increased risk of liver cancer also developed cancer when they were given vitamin K2 as a food supplement. In the comparison group, which did not receive any additional vitamin K2, a full 47% developed liver cancer. Vitamin K deficiency. Apparently, many human beings are not aware of the importance of the two K vitamins and the great role they play in health. Experts have found that a great many human beings have too low a level of vitamin K in their blood, and that deficiency symptoms are very widespread among those who eat poorly. Moreover, many human beings do not even know that and how they can prevent vitamin K deficiency. Vitamin K requirement. The German Nutrition Society recommends at least 65 Ug for women and 80 Ug for men, or 0.031.5 Ug micrograms per kilogram of body weight daily. For children, 10 Ug per kilogram body weight daily is recommended. This is sufficient to activate the clotting factors in the liver, but not for the functions beyond that. Since breastfed infants are exposed to the rare risk of clinically relevant vitamin K deficiency with the danger of dangerous brain hemorrhages, vitamin K prophylaxis is recommended in most countries of the world. An overdose of vitamin K is most likely not possible, At least no such case has ever been reported, even at a dose of 4,000 UG per day. The recommended intake is about 65 UG to 100 UG daily. Overall, with a normal diet, more serious hypovitaminoses are rare, unless requirements are measured against the needs of osteoporosis prophylaxis, which requires much higher doses. For long-term osteoporosis prophylaxis, doses of 180 UG daily are recommended based on a study by Dutch researchers. Since it can be assumed that the recommendations are absolute minimums that only just ensure blood clotting, but do not take into account all the other tasks that the K vitamins have to fulfill, it seems appropriate to ensure oneself that the supply of vitamins K1 and K2 is covered beyond the officially recommended level. This is all the more advisable because the two vitamins K1 and K2 are not toxic, even in high doses. There is no such thing as vitamin K hypervitaminosis, with the exception of substitution treatment in the newborn, where vitamin K in high doses can trigger hemolysis because the infant's organism is not yet able to cope with certain mechanisms to a sufficient degree. It may well be advisable to reconsider taking food supplements with vitamin K2. It should be taken into account that vitamins K2 and D3 act together with calcium, which suggests that an all-round supply of calcium, vitamin K2 and vitamin D3 should be considered. More information on vitamin K1 and vitamin K2 can be found on the internet, including Wikipedia, Zentrum der Gesundheit, and Herzteam Will, which provides a good table of vitamin K containing foods. Bernadette brand, Switzerland.
Now the time has come to abolish cash, which we have talked about before. I also gave the two girls an article for you on that, written by Marianne.
And which I have, of course, also read and must say is good.
The horrendous lies of the authorities. Bankers, economists, and economic practices, as well as the screaming naivety and thoughtlessness of the masses of people, lead to total surveillance and expropriation. Horror visions become reality.
The battle against cash has begun. Michael Rash, NZZ 22.5. 2015. The Trojan horse frontal attack on coined freedom. The surveillance state lurks. Der gläserne Finanzbürger nahen Rahmenpemani. Munzen und Geldscheine sind ein Anachronismus. Peter Bofinger. Bargeld braucht nur deine Oma und der Bankrauber-Slogan of the Swedish cash opponents. Ökonomen fordern die Abschaffung des Bargeldes. Börse aktuell. Der Negativsinn steht für eine irrsinnige Welt. Michael Rash, NZ 29.5. 2015. Such and similar headlines in paper and online newspapers refer to the hard-hitting intentions of the authorities. Bankers, economists, and so-called economic experts, what a silly name, to take away the most popular means of payment, namely cash, from the people by hypocritical and dishonest means, and to turn them, the human beings, into transparent and manipulated citizens, and finally to expropriate them. Manfred Petrich, alias Freeman, who himself worked in the financial and investment banking sector, and now enlightens readers about the machinations of the rip-off elite in his extremely interesting blog Alles Schall und Rausch, wrote already at the end of 2011 under the title Monty Wants to Turn Italy into a Cashless Society about the dangers and debt accumulation by banks and via credit cards. See Alles Schall und Rausch on the 18th of April 2014 at the 585th official contact. Billy Edward Albert Meyer, and Jishwish Ptah talked, among other things, about the creeping abolition of cash and the intended total surveillance of Earth humans. The two gentlemen could have spoken about this much earlier, because they know the future and know what horrible misery will befall us Earthlings if we do not finally see through the intentions and machinations of the so-called economic elite, the powerful and rulers and their servants and henchmen, and put an inglorious end to them. Whereas in earlier times the statements were merely prophecies, the effects of which could still have been changed by correct thinking and action. The longer they go on, the more they turn into predictions. In this context, see also Enoch's prophecies, predictions of the prophets Jeremiah and Elijah, what is to be proclaimed comprehensively for the third millennium in prophetic and predictive terms. Warnings to all governments of Europe, 1958. Documents mostly available as PDF under download. Billy and Peta's words were published in Figu Special Bulletin number 79 of July 2014, but shall be repeated for corroboration.
But I have another question, and that is regarding credit cards, which are being used more and more. Could it be that credit cards are a way of eventually getting cash out of official circulation altogether? By this, I don't mean that cash will be abolished and a moneyless form will emerge, as you have with you. Rather, it seems to me that this is precisely what is being worked towards, so that money will only exist in the banks, and thus human beings can be controlled in a total way with regard to cash, as well as possessions, goods, and assets.
You are really grasping the whole thing before anything is officially made noisy about it. Because in fact, this is exactly what is being worked towards in a secret way by the banks and the financial powers of various states. In this way, Earth humans are ultimately to be controlled in a totalitarian way, down to the smallest piece of money and also in terms of taxation, and financially exploited with more and more compulsory levies. The whole thing is therefore not aimed at creating a system without money, but in reality only to bring about total control of Earth humans with regard to their money, possessions, and assets. Such total control, as well as total surveillance of every human being, is especially sought by the EU.
The control chip that has been announced since the 1960s, which is to be implanted in every human being, which will then contain all their birth, illness, life, and social data, etc., in order to monitor them in a totalitarian way and to be able to determine exactly where they are at any given moment, down to the centimeter. To a certain extent, this is already being done with dogs and cats as well as with other pets, and even with wild animals. Finally, there is the last horror vision of mental surveillance and control. That is, that the thoughts and feelings of human beings are also controlled, as well as their desires, needs, wishes, actions, deeds, and behavior. And if it really comes to that, this mental control, as certain visions of the future have been depicting since the 1960s and even since time immemorial, then the human being will be completely robbed of his personal freedom by those in power in the governments. And indeed, for some time now, many things have been pointing to the fact that everything is moving towards the visions. When I think of the EU, it has been carrying out dictatorial measures and methods to suppress democracy since its very beginning, whereby the state powers subjugate every political, social, and cultural life in its entirety according to the leader principle of all dictators, such as Hitler, Stalin, Saddam Hussein, Ceausescu, etc., and regulate everything and anything by force.
It is not there yet. But you are right that the overall development is moving in that direction in terms of totalitarian control, surveillance, and oppression of Earth humans, just as ancient prophecies set it out.
Of course, total surveillance does not happen from one day to the next, but is successively planned over decades, even if it looks to the uninitiated as if something is completely new. What is often not noticed or negated is the fact that everything is connected by the law of causality. Everything that moves in the universe and everything does move has an influence on everything else and knows about everything else. See also Existent Life in the Universe. Billy Figu, Aquarian Time Publishing. For millennia, ways and means have been sought again and again to manipulate the foot people and make them compliant. Now, at the beginning of the 21st century, certain narrow-minded politicians and economic wise men, e.g. Peter Bowfinger, who received the toilet seat from Ramin Peymani for his proposal to abolish cash, seem to have found a way via negative interest rates, especially in the EU dictatorship and its vassals. The Swiss government and the EU turbos, not the people. The SNB, Swiss National Bank, and the central banks want to tax money via negative interest rates. However, negative interest can only be levied on account balances. So it is. The cash, money must go. The transparent citizen sends his regards. Have you already thought about what it would mean for you to no longer have any small change or banknotes in your wallet? Only one or more credit cards that you have to use for all your payments? What would it be like for you if the police arrested you and searched your flat or house because you wanted to pay a larger amount in cash? Some short-sighted among you will probably shrug their shoulders now and think, so what? I do not care. I do not have any money anyway. Besides, it is much easier. Then nothing can be stolen from me either, and the state knows everything about me anyway. Of course, organized crime and money laundering can also be made more difficult. But anyone who assumes that these corrupt regimes and mafia organizations would not find ways and means to smuggle their illegally acquired assets into the legal, financial, and economic cycle is probably mistaken. Moreover, should these indisputable advantages for the state really be weighted higher than our individual freedom? Please go through some actions in your head that you always do with cash. For example, how will you tip your newspaper carrier at the end of the year in the future? Do you make a transfer so that he can be taxed? How do you resolve the regular contribution to your granddaughter and/or grandson or someone else you like, for example, your mistress or lover? How do you make it clear to the tax authorities that this is not a reportable employment relationship, but a noble supportive gesture? Do you want to have to constantly justify to the state why you spend money on this and that? Do you want to be under constant pressure to explain yourself, to justify yourself? Moreover, and very importantly, have you already thought about how you will pay in the event of a power cut? Interesting in this context is the book Blackout Tomorrow It's Too Late, Techno-Thriller by Mark Ellsberg. What about gold? Would gold also be banned as a means of payment? And jewelry and other so-called valuables? Would you even want to save money if you were only taxed with negative interest rates and other levies? What about compulsory expropriations if the state, with its horrendous mountain of debt, needed money and chose you to pay part of it? Or the municipality wants to house refugees in your flat or house? Does the idea that the refugee family of 10 will spread out in your house and you will be compensated with a cellar hole, if at all, give you a good feeling? Interesting and frightening at the same time what is happening in Sweden and can be read at the link Schweden. Zwangsenteignung von Eigentumsimmobilien für Asylanten? Fortunately, we have a partial democracy in Switzerland. And so I very much hope that the sensible and reasonable as well as forward-thinking voting citizens will prevent excesses of the SNB and the state at the ballot box. What comes next when the state exercises sovereignty over our finances? Does it also want sovereignty over our thoughts, feelings, and actions? Credit cards and other cards are already equipped with RFID technology, radio frequency identification, equal-sign identification with the help of electromagnetic waves. We can be located via our smartphones, mobile phones. So an RFID EU dictatorship chip in the head? The authorities will then determine what you think, who you are with, what job you do, who you marry, and what you will or will not do. A horror vision. See also excerpt from Contact 512 in FIGU Special Bulletin Number 60, http www. FIGU, Org Verin Periodica Sonder, Bulletin 2011 Nur 60, already in FIGU Bulletin Number 2 of May 1995, writes Billy Edward Albert Meyer. Billy Edward Albert Meyer under the title Surveillance Systems, among other things the following.
The DSP surveillance system of the Americans is also the first step towards the future horror vision of the total control of Earth humans. A vision which expresses that Earth humans will soon no longer be able to take a step without being observed and controlled by an all-encompassing surveillance system, whereby human beings will be implanted with a code chip through which total control will become possible, whereby the human being will no longer be able to be unobserved and uncontrolled in any way, not even in his most private and intimate activities. In Europe, the vision shows the all-encompassing surveillance center is to be located in Brussels, directed and controlled by the European Union, as it calls itself today, in whose secret sense it also lies to establish a form of dictatorship, from which the total surveillance of the citizen will then result. A horror vision that is beginning to be realized more and more and is recognizable to anyone who still observes the world with open eyes. But also a horror vision that heralds the New World Order, which since time immemorial has been linked to the prophecy that the beast with the number 666 will exercise its mighty power. A prophecy and vision about which I intend to report in a responsible form in the FIGU Bulletin, among many other important things about which Earth humans should be oriented.
If all the foregoing and what else you can think of still does not concern you, or, even worse, you even agree with it, it is useful to address freedom and its effective meaning again. Freedom is not only being able to choose and decide between different possibilities without constraint and not being trapped, etc., but freedom is a state of consciousness. True freedom implies independence from burdensome things, whether physical or psychological, but also freedom from constraints of one's own or others' nature. Freedom also includes, among other things, the freedom of self-determination and the freedom to use reason and understanding, etc. True freedom is an inner freedom that belongs to the human mental block. Mental block =, consciousness, thoughts, feelings, and psyche. In other words, the human being builds and nourishes his freedom and consciousness through his thoughts, their feelings, and the psyche. Obeying the laws and recommendations of human beings enables the human being to endure a threatening or simply unpleasant condition and to make the best of it for himself without despair. However, if a chip is implanted in the human being's head through which his own thoughts are overridden, his evolution of consciousness stagnates. He becomes a dictatorship puppet. Is that what you want? The powerful and the rulers are very clever. They shamelessly exploit the joy of innovation and technology, as well as the urge to play and research, but also the delusion of faith, the belief in authority, the need for dependency, the envy of food, the degenerated joy of childbearing, the hurriedness, the unwillingness to learn, the laziness to think, the forgetfulness, the stupidity, the indifference, the ignorance, the comfort, and the latent autism, especially of the younger generation, laughing shamelessly in their own favor. And they thus achieve their goal, which they are dangerously close to for the normal Earth humans. The ladies and gentlemen of authority and all others of the same or similar color have been suffering from the same symptoms since time immemorial. They are partly sick in their consciousness, do not abide by any creational laws and recommendations =, counseling, futile about justice and interpret ethics in their own depraved or false human sense. Such human beings are either completely naive and somehow stupid, or then unfeeling and compassionate psychopaths of varying degrees. If they have a goal in mind, they pursue it at whatever cost to others. However, they are not only unfeeling, uncompassionate, fearless, and ruthless, but also extremely clever, charming, winning, and endowed with an extraordinary capacity for thought. See FIGU Special Bulletin Number 72, How to Recognize a Human Being as a Psychopath, Billy. The following statement by Ptah from the 567th official contact from the 6th of July, 2013, points to the noble character of many suggestive impulse recipients and the lust for power and destruction of the military rulers and the powerful, which should be mentioned to substantiate what I have said. The whole of what has been discussed in this regard can be read in FIGU Bulletin Number 83.
All that you have said is correct. And unfortunately, it is indeed the case that Earth humans always tend to use everything for might, for harassment and for destruction, etc. It is true that we sent impulses to all those who received suggestive impulses from us due to development and progress. In each individual case, also impulses which were directed towards a peaceful use of all new developments. But those in power and those in military power and other powerful forces worked against this. And unfortunately, the researchers, scientists, inventors, and developers always let themselves be beguiled by them. Consequently, out of much that we put into the capable of research, science and development for the good of Earth humans through unconscious suggestive impulses for development and progress, in the end a great deal was created that only brought death and destruction. And this is what happened with regard to all technology of every kind, physics, chemistry, medicine, and all other sciences. In fact, the knowledge gained and developments made by Earth humans in all fields over the last 170 years would only have come about in the first centuries of the third millennium without our suggestive, impulsive aid to development and progress. Unfortunately, however, all researchers, scientists, and developers who were involved in our suggestive impulses were either corrupt, greedy for profit, naive, or so weak in self-confidence that they bowed to the demands of the powerful. However, it is also to be said that various ones were coerced by the ruling, powerful and criminal elements, while others simply feared for their lives and therefore submitted to the will of the rulers and the military, etc.
In connection with technology, it is worth mentioning, which is already evident from Ptah's statement above, that it was the Plejaren who, during the past 170 years from 1844 onwards, provided the earthly researchers, scientists, inventors, and developers with suggestive impulse aids to speed up the whole development enormously. In the 585th official contact from the 18th of April 2014, Ptah explains why the Plejaren gave apparatus hypnotic development impulses to selected scientists. Full text to be read in FIGU Special Bulletin No. 79, July 2014. Without these unconscious suggestive impulses for development and progress, the human beings of the Earth would still be without electronics, without nuclear power, and without good medicine, schooling, etc., and without today's danger of total electronic surveillance. Whereby it must be said that the surveillance, denunciation, and the monstrous outrages of the Catholic Church during the Inquisition, which has continued since the beginning of the 13th century until today, are for the time being only far surpassed in their viciousness, brutality, and disgracefulness by the IS, the Islamist state. Everything always has two sides, a positive and a negative. That is to say, everything can always be used both positively and negatively. If the positive degenerates, it is just as negative as if the negative degenerates. Just as the car only becomes an instrument of murder when the driver uses it to drive a human being to death, the networked computer only becomes a damaging instrument because of the programs that are created, loaded into the computer, and executed by wrong thinking and vile human beings. It is always the human beings with their degenerate thinking who abuse a technology. It is not the technology per se. How is it even possible that it could come to this, that even the NZZ on the 29th of May 2015 in its column, Börsen und Märkte, Stock Exchanges and Markets, in an article by Michael Rasch NZZ, head of stock exchanges, with the title Der Negativsinn steht für eine irrsinnige Welt. Negative interest stands for an insane world. Subtitle, Große Bedenken gegen das Verbot von Bargeld und Ideen zu seiner Besteuerung. Big misgivings about banning cash and ideas about taxing it. And in the text itself speaks of financial repression and alienating thinking? On whom or what can Earth humans shift the responsibility for what they are now facing? On a god, or to the coincidence so beloved of scientists? Not at all. Everything that is going on is the human being's own fault. Assuming that the Earth's population of 529 million human beings were a reality, Earth's population on 31.12. 2014 00 hours =8,532,048,007 human beings Would it then occur to anyone to harass their fellow human beings, torture them, slit their throats, rob them of their possessions, goods, and assets, and want to totally monitor and manipulate them? Hardly. So all evil is fundamentally due to our massive overpopulation and the stupidity of human beings in not containing it and in not turning to the creational laws and recommendations. The human being personally provides the causes for his condition, for ultimately everything is fulfilled on the basis of causality, that is to say, the creational natural law of cause and effect. Causality is by no means the product of chance, but is the law of cause and effect, which means that a cause gives rise to consequential processes that fit together seamlessly and consequently become the providence that subsequently forms the effect. In the entire universe, the universal system of law and order is at work, to which the creational natural law of causality also belongs. Causality as a factor of cause and effect is formed by the creational natural laws and recommendations in such a way that its effects or results work in moral, psychic, and physical, as well as in action, deed, ideas, thoughts, and feelings, but also in all other possible areas. The law of causation is not such that the causes and effects as such are determined by creation, but that these are created by the human being himself, and by all life forms as well as by everything that exists universally and by all events that come into being. See Teaching Scripture for the Teaching of Truth, Teaching of Spirit, Teaching of Life, Billy Edward Albert Meyer, Figu, Aquarian Time Publishing House. The primordial law of all existence, which also includes the law of causality, cannot be brought down because even before the Big Bang, creation universal consciousness had thought up or coded all creational laws and recommendations spiritually over trillions of years. This code, which consists of fine material spirit energy physical impulses, contains everything concerning cause and effect, but not the causes themselves. These come, as it were, from outside the code. Thus, as already mentioned above, through all life forms, as well as through everything that exists universally and through all events that come into being. However, they have an effect on the code, because every energy, every particle, every thought, every action, every word, every feeling, and every impulse are causes and trigger very specific effects. The causes produce movement and cause everything that comes out of them to be directed in certain directions and produce effects that are determined by the causes. What is going on now? That is to say, the frontal attack on our cash, the intended total surveillance and expropriation, is an effect of all the preceding causes, fusions, and effects, which in turn became causes. Without all the religious wars, the corrupt, murderous, and dictatorial elements, the national debts, the massive overpopulation, etc., we would not have the condition we find ourselves in now. Consequently, the danger of the abolition of cash, negative interest rates, surveillance, expropriation, etc., cannot be considered individually. The following list names facts of the current world reality equal-sign causes with an increasing tendency, whether they are seen or perceived as such or not. They are a fact. How do these causes affect us human beings, our living spaces, and our well-being? Do you see an ideal world in which even more children are to be born in order to implant a chip in them immediately after birth? Do you think that the extent of what has been said will be reduced without Earth humans actively bringing about a change for the good and positive on the basis of insight, reason, and understanding, and of course the study of the creational laws and recommendations? Please look at the point's existing causes and try to fathom the effects from the given causes with foresight. Mental depravity, dictatorial lust for power, lack of justice, greed for money, greed for exploitation, lust for oppression, lust for manipulation by the ruling class. Enormous national debt, fraud, and deceit. Unemployment, housing shortage, food shortage, water shortage due to massive overpopulation and the associated aggressiveness, blackmail, and also fear of the population. Storms, climate catastrophes with primeval conditions. environmental catastrophes, air pollution, famines, asylum seekers and economic refugees problem, mixing of peoples. Religious fanaticism, war, robbery, murder and manslaughter, increasing brutality towards uninvolved and innocent human beings. Murderous and destructive weapons. Melting of the polar ice caps. Computer and electronic hacking, unwanted intelligence activities. Space problems on the roads and in public transport, etc. Increasing susceptibility to disease, cancer, epidemics, etc., also as a result of poisoning the seeds with toxic substances, etc. False human thinking, delusion. Illogical thinking, that is to say purely material and against the laws of creation. Satisfaction in betraying the freedom of consciousness and will of human beings. Shameful naivety and stupidity of the followers, the pro and pro-hate criers and the passive shoulder-shrugging foot people. The scientists' megalomania, blackmail, fear, and obedience. High technology in various fields, computer science, medicine, engineering, etc., and corresponding instruments, tools, and means of blackmail computers, programs, networks, smartphones, RFID chips, GPS, implantation technology, credit cards, etc., etc. Inability to foresee, that is to say, inability to recognize an effect from an existing cause and act accordingly in the correct way, etc., etc. If you have come to a similar or the same conclusion as Billy Edward Albert Meyer / Billy Edward Albert Meyer describes in his own words in the following text, then you have a talent for networked thinking and can look reality in the eye. Words of Billy Edward Albert Meyer from the 583rd Contact from the 19th of March 2014. The full text is in FIGU Special Bulletin Number 79, July 2014.
And when I consider the scenario that you described to me, it was, I think, during a private conversation in 1990, that may arise in the future with earthly human beings as a result of overpopulation and the resulting worldwide destruction of nature. Fauna and flora, the climate as well as the social cohesion of human beings and the emerging breakdown of interpersonal relationships, then I dread. And when I think of what you said about the deterioration of the cultural and ethical and moral, conscientious, behavioral and educational values of the human beings of the earth, who, with regard to all things of existence and life, are falling into complete indifference and even hostility towards one another, then the present proves to me that these conditions have already been reached and are now rapidly progressing. In addition, you said that this was the beginning of the downfall of society and could even lead to the downfall of humanity if all the evils were not changed. You spoke of a period of about 200 years sooner or later, that this catastrophe would result if the Earthlings did not find their way back to the effective values of life and existence. In particular, also to the fact that overpopulation would be stopped and the mass of humanity normalized by a worldwide birth stop.
Cash withdrawal, total surveillance, and expropriation are merely logical stages on the way to the downfall of society. A horror vision. Marianne Walinger, Switzerland.